In the following, hopefully 15 minutes, I'm going to attempt to make a general overview and to draw some conclusions regarding the situation of export barriers which are applicable to high technology products, specifically artificial intelligence and other transformative technologies such as quantum technologies, 5G, and other solutions which will most likely transform both war and peace in the following decades. The outline of my presentation is as follows. Firstly, I will try to attempt a short overview of export barriers as economic and geopolitical tools that have been used in the recent past in order to limit or to constrain the economic flow of certain types of goods, especially items that will be defined in a broad sense. Export barriers and the advanced digital technologies to which they are applied shall be presented, and also the current state of such barriers shall be addressed. Then problems posed by the export restrictions will be analyzed, and finally I will attempt to draw some conclusions and propose solutions for a fair and effective export restriction regime. Firstly, a short overview, not so very short overview actually, of export barriers is necessary because these barriers present numerous problems when applied to high technology, when applied to AI, when applied to quantum technology, semiconductors, and so on. Firstly, export barriers to sensitive technologies have been known since antiquity. The Roman Empire has banned the export of certain maritime items, and so has the Dutch Empire 1,600 years later. The technological restrictions of the pre-First World War period, as well as the Second World War and then the Cold War, are also well known. So the restricting of exports for certain technologies is nothing new. What is new is the extent of these technologies. My colleague yesterday talked about a tale of broadening terms. And this tale can also be told regarding export restrictions. Why? Because whereas initial restrictions referred to weapons technology, or dual-use items where the quote-unquote dual-use or possible military use was rather obvious, now export controls tend to somehow affect also technologies that are general use, even if dual use is possible, and even technologies that are more apparently of civilian than of dual use. I would like to mention for this final category the recent extension of export bans from the United States to certain semiconductors, even when they have already been built into laptops. Now, these semiconductors are physically affixed to the laptop's motherboard, which means that their usage, their civilian usage mainly, has already been pre-established by the manufacturer, even if they can be unmounted from the motherboard by technological means. So regulation has significantly broadened in the 20th century for such technologies. All these items that are regulated will enter into one of the following categories, which are somehow at times counterintuitive. For example, when we talk about exports, we usually refer to goods that are corporeal, that can be held in hand, or to information that has been affixed into some form of data carrier, books, DVDs, memory sticks, and so on. However, exports will refer in this context to also other types of items, generally designated as items, that are prohibited. And some of these items give room for significant concern. These items have been included into complex lists meant to ensure that they cannot cross borders towards certain states or through certain states. Sanctions lists and embargoes, as well as catch-all rules that are contained in some lists, are used to effectuate restrictions that are broader than ever for certain transformative technologies. The criteria for restricting the flow of these technologies as has been established by previous export control regimes and solutions such as, for example, the Wassenaar arrangement, usually consider 4 major aspects for instituting an export ban. Classification of technologies. Certain technologies will not be allowed to be exported or to transit certain countries, or even the technologies necessary for manufacturing them may be banned from exports. The destination, which is specific to embargoes as an export limitation method, will ban technologies from reaching a certain point. The end user and the end use may consider the person using the technology, even if that person is not in a fixed geographical location, or the purpose for which the technology is deployed. As for the legal instruments which effectuate barriers to exports of advanced technologies, these are predominantly national instruments, constitutional provisions defending human rights and the laws that are enacted under such provisions, Magnitsky laws, which are a relatively new instrument for curtailing certain political regimes that are considered to be outside the bounds of the rule of law, as well as certain international instruments, specifically non-binding international instruments and closed clubs such as the Wassenaar arrangement are also used, of course, to effectuate these types of restrictions. The laws of armed conflict, neutrality law, weapons laws, arms controls laws for technologies that are clearly of a military use do exist at the international level. However, they are just part of the solution to export controls, because weapons controls cannot be used for advanced technologies that are not clearly weaponized. So while artificial intelligence built into, for example, a cruise missile will be subject to international arms control law, or may be subject to it, the same artificial intelligence may not be subject to the rules when it's built into a car GPS, even if the technology itself may be of dual use. And finally, pertaining to legal regulation of the export barriers to significant technologies, it must be mentioned that these regulations create an inherent tension between the principle of free trade and any kind of restrictive measure. It must also be underlined that defense, international law of armed conflicts, and national security are valid exemptions under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, under the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, and so on. However, these general exemptions for limiting free trade are not clearly applicable to transformative technologies. There is no general rule that says that transformative technologies such as AI should be considered just as weapons, the trade in which may be duly limited. Continuing with the problems of export barriers, we must mention the very notion of export. What does that mean? Export usually is understood as taking an item over a national border, granting it a foreign destination, even temporarily. However, the notion of exports in this context is much wider. For example, there may be use cases in which an item never effectively transits a national border. Let's take the example of computer code that's uploaded onto an online repository where the memory itself sits or resides in the United States, but the code itself is read in places such as Iran. Did an export occur? Yes. According to American export rules, an export in this situation may occur. Even worse, there are situations of in-country quote-unquote exports, the so-called deemed exports. For example, unveiling at an international conference some sort of transformative technology in one's own country, while in the audience there are seated persons from countries under embargoes or other restrictions, may constitute an unauthorized export, even in a situation in which the information that's being disclosed is not classified. It should be noted that for similar situations, even though invoking classification in their cases, the Russian state has taken to subjecting to various measures and including to severe punishment scientists who have participated in Russia's hypersonic weapons program. And this is a recent development. So these types of exports should be considered not just in the context of the free flow of goods, of equipment, of items in the broadest sense, but also in the context of the free flow of knowledge. Non-compliance with such regimes may carry severe penalties, and adding to this risk, even compliance will increase costs and will increase economic friction when these regimes are implemented. So therefore, the problem of export barriers must be a subject of analysis for any state that desires, on the one hand, to maintain a competitive defense industry, and on the other hand, that desires to permit technological development in its own territory. Which transformative technologies are the ones that should be analyzed in this context? Artificial intelligence, of course, is the principal advanced digital technology that is subject to current high-profile restrictions, especially in the United States. The US is a leading state in the development of artificial intelligence and desires to maintain that lead indefinitely. Therefore, several measures are enacted regarding items, knowledge, technologies, the full range of elements that can be subjected to export restrictions. Another technology with transformative potential, especially in cryptography, is quantum computing, for which the United States has already enacted export controls that were mirrored, for example, by China. But other technologies such as 5G may also be enumerated in this category. Measures for the export control of AI and quantum technologies have flourished, for lack of a better word, in the past few years. The United States Bureau of Industry and Security has repeatedly amended its lists in order to ensure that such technologies cannot be exported from the US. Australia has drawn these technologies under the umbrella of national security problems. China's export control law was amended in order to effectuate an answer or a counterstrike towards the United States, especially with the restriction of certain rare earth metals that China is able to export. And the European Union dual-use regulation has also mirrored American restrictions towards China, even though this regulation, respectively its application, has not yet been updated to the current form, the latest form of BIS lists. So the question is legitimate. What is and what ought to be a subject to restriction? The main objects of export controls should be technology, knowledge, programs, foundational AI, implementations, or hardware. The international literature seems to agree on the fact that theories, software, implementations for general AI applications, I'm not talking about artificial general intelligence here, excuse me, I'm talking about generalized applications of AI, are very hard to restrict. What is easier to restrict, and what the United States is restricting, for example, in the BIS lists, are manufacturing equipment for advanced semiconductors and the semiconductors themselves, including, as I said recently, even semiconductors in the potentially civilian sphere. So what are the problems posed by export restrictions in this manner that must be treated somehow under some sort of a cooperative framework? Technological decoupling vis-à-vis China may thwart international technological cooperation. It's an interesting question. We currently have a lead that we may want to preserve. However, what happens if the national technology and industrial corpus of China develops beyond our lead? Then can we take our lead back if there is an atmosphere of restrictions? Extraterritorial application. This is relevant to the European defense industry because many products that have been built utilizing For example, American technology will be subject to American export rules, even if these rules are applied outside the territory of the United States. So, for example, chip manufacturing with Dutch machines may result in an export ban for chips to China, even if these machines themselves are not in an area where the US may apply its restrictions directly under its sovereign territory. Foreign direct product rules of this sort pose compliance risks to European suppliers of different kinds. Complex multi-actor regulatory regimes have been built up without proper legal frameworks. Complex, as of yet untested technologies are being subjected to these regimes. Added friction and costs in commerce appear out of every nook and cranny of the entire regulation of export restrictions. Lack of transparency is endemic, and lack of clear and impartial jurisdiction as state and private parties involved in these matters try to work out whether someone has been compliant or non-compliant. And some actors, specifically China, may also aim to develop national technological alternatives to imported technologies. Thereby, these restrictions may actually end up strengthening the Chinese technological corpus, for which specifically the United States has enacted similar restrictions. Conclusions and some proposed solutions for these problems can be perhaps summarized as follows. As a conclusion, it's clear that export restrictions on potentially disruptive information technologies slow global technological development and invite countermeasures. Therefore, a tit-for-tat reaction between measure and countermeasure may result in a downward spiral resembling the Cold War. Export restriction regimes are needlessly complex and remain in the hands of national regulators. It's enough to take a look at the BIS lists for the United States or their corresponding counterparts in Europe or even China. Surprisingly, the Chinese regulation is published in English to see that these lists are needlessly complex and do not tend to treat the problem of technological development properly. Whenever new technology appears, the lists have to be amended. End user and end use solutions would be a lot better alternative than classification solutions for new export restrictions. A wider economic decoupling may result from such restrictions, which is clear, and no international regulatory body as yet exists to make order in this type of ever-expanding field of restrictions. Some ways of mitigating some of the issues have been proposed in the literature. For example, Americans proposed the so-called small yard, high fence approach. That is, strongly defended technologies of a very narrow scope that would be subject to export restrictions. And this is a temporary solution, but a solution nonetheless. Concentrating on specific software and advanced hardware is also a solution. Advanced hardware manufacturing facilities usually exist either in the United States or in Europe or in Taiwan, which means that these facilities and their products may be more easily controlled while still permitting the export of lower technology products so as not to upset global trade. A possible democratic technology alliance has been proposed with participating states only the ones that are considered democracies and which may at one point supplant the Wassenaar arrangement. What is the problem with the Wassenaar arrangement? Why must it be supplanted? This can be resumed in a single sentence. Russia is party to it, and China is not. And this renders the Wassenaar arrangement mostly dysfunctional. Common international standards for exportable artificial intelligence, for example, could be developed, as well as an international regime similar to the GATT or WTO process for ensuring that export controls do not transform into anything else than a method by which legitimate purposes of national security can be achieved. I would like to thank you for your kind attention, and I will await the questions in the panel. Thank you very much.